We'll call this hearing to order, and I want to say good afternoon to everybody. I want to thank our witnesses on both panels for being here, and I look forward to all the testimony that's going to be given today. As we celebrate World Trade Month, it's only fitting to have Deputy United States Trade Representative before the committee to discuss the administration's trade strategy. And first, I appreciate your effort to expedite the implementation of the free trade agreements with Korea and Colombia, and which actually just went into effect yesterday. And I hope the FTA with Panama is quick to follow. The certainty and protections provided in these agreements will help thousands of small firms increase their sales, grow their businesses, and ultimately create many more jobs. Small businesses rely heavily on negotiated agreements to remove trade barriers and to be competitive in the global marketplace. Unlike large corporations, most small firms do not have the personnel and resources to navigate technical trade barriers. And as a result, many either don't export at all or only export to just a few countries. Given the right circumstances and tools, I know America's small businesses can do a whole lot better. And we must provide small businesses with the resources necessary to increase their exports. That means we need an aggressive trade strategy to open new markets, streamline the trade process, and combat unfair trade practices. As we have heard, the President's goal to double exports by 2014 puts small businesses as the #1 priority. While I applaud this effort, we have yet to see some real strategy. And small firms in the U.S. economy cannot wait another 5 years for the next trade agreement. This committee has made increasing exports an absolute priority, and that is why I recently introduced the Export Coordination Act of 2012 to make the export process more efficient, while reducing duplication and wasteful spending on federal trade promotion agencies. I look forward to working with the administration on identifying ways to improve the system. And again, I want to thank you for being here, and also thank our other witnesses for being here. And I'll turn to Ranking Member Velasquez for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Ambassador Shapiro. We have heard time and again about the need to put small businesses at the forefront of our economic recovery, but perhaps no other group is more critical to this effort than small exporters. According to U.S. Treasury Department figures, more than 50 million American workers are employed by more than 250,000 small and medium-sized companies that export goods overseas. Small businesses that export grow faster, create more jobs, and pay higher wages than other businesses. Clearly, in order for the recovery to gain steam, our economy will increasingly depend on foreign trade to fuel new growth. Despite these advantages, it remains difficult for small businesses to take up the mantle and enter foreign markets. By some estimates, just 1% of the 28 million small firms in this country are doing so. Even though they account for 97% of America's exporting companies, they account for only a third of all goods shipped overseas. Most sell their goods to only one foreign country and to only one customer in that country. Clearly, these firms possess untapped economic potential, and today's hearing will help us understand how this may be accomplished in the wake of passage of the South Korea, Panama, and Colombia free trade agreements last year. Balanced free trade agreements have the potential to be a significant driver of prosperity. By eliminating tariffs and other barriers, these agreements can help small firms expand sales globally and create jobs at home. In order for these benefits to be fully realized, we must hold our trading partners accountable for unfair practices and ensure that our small businesses receive the level playing field they were promised. Unfortunately, our history in this area does not inspire much optimism. In 1993, before the North Free Trade Agreement took effect, the U.S. had a $1.6 billion trade surplus with Mexico, which supported 29,400 jobs here at home. Since then, imports from Mexico have grown much faster than U.S. exports, resulting in large trade deficits that have displaced 682,900 jobs nationwide. Although many of the workers that were laid off due to NAFTA were reallocated to other sectors, the majority were relocated to the service industry, where average wages are a fraction of what they received before. As long as the U.S. persists in trying to play by free trade rules, while foreign nations are allowed to play the 400-year-old game of mercantilism, we can expect to see similar results. Still, we must be diligent in our efforts to get it right. In regard to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this sweeping agreement has the potential to remove numerous barriers and give American small firms access to new markets on the Pacific Rim. However, there are concerns that it's reaching beyond areas that have traditionally been the purview of trade policy. Reports have emerged that this agreement might seek to bind the U.S. to new standards for everything from foreign investment to pharmaceutical prices and copyright protections. It will be critical that these issues be discussed in an open and forthright manner before this agreement can be finalized, and it is my hope that the Office of the USTR will make good on its commitment to do so. Now, more than ever, our country needs policies that encourage fair trade and promote small business growth. I look forward to hearing how our existing and potential future trade agreements can achieve these goals, as well as how export assistance programs can assist small firms. I would like to thank the witnesses in advance for their testimony, and I'm pleased they could join us today and look forward to hearing from them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Nydia. Our first witness is Ambassador Miriam Shapiro. She's the Deputy U.S. Trade Representative with the Office of the United States Trade Representative. She's also responsible for trade negotiations and enforcement with Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. She also oversees the Office of Small Business, Market Access, and Industrial Competitiveness at the USTR. Thank you for being here, and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the committee, especially for convening this hearing today and for giving me the opportunity to testify about what we are doing to support small business and thereby support greater economic growth and jobs throughout the country. Despite a fragile global economy, the growth of U.S. exports over the last year has been a bright spot. Our exports of goods and services have surpassed their pre-crisis peak, and we are making good progress towards meeting President Obama's goal of doubling exports by the end of 2014. During the past 12 months, the United States exported more than $2 trillion in goods and services, which is the highest level of exports in any 12-month period in U.S. history. As our economic recovery continues, we have added private sector jobs for 26 straight months for a total of 4.25 million jobs over this period. As the President has emphasized, America's small business are key engines of our nation's economic growth and job creation. They are a critical source of innovative processes, products, and services. I speak as someone who started and ran a small business before I re-entered government and experienced firsthand the challenges, the risks, and the opportunities involved. America's smaller firms are already playing a major role in international trade, accounting for nearly 98% of all exporters. Direct and indirect exports by U.S. small business support 4 million jobs and account for an estimated 40% of the total value of our goods and services exports. These trends are very positive, but we believe our small companies still have significant room for export growth. Only a small fraction, as you both pointed out, currently export, and of those, most tend to go only to one market and have one customer. With 95% of the world's customers living beyond our borders, we can and we must do better. To accomplish this, we are pursuing a robust trade policy that supports small business and broader economic growth by tearing down barriers to trade and by creating new opportunities for U.S. farmers, ranchers, manufacturers, and service providers. We are also vigorously enforcing our trade rights, insisting that countries fulfill their commitments and act according to the rules to which they agreed. Our trade agreements, now with nearly 20 countries, open the doors for valuable export opportunities for our small business. With this committee's strong support, Congress approved the FTAs with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. And as you pointed out just yesterday, the Colombia Agreement entered into force. This makes it easier and less expensive for our small businesses like the meat packers and the dairy farmers in your district, Mr. Chairman, to export their products to this important Latin American country. And this week, we are concluding the 12th round of the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations in Dallas, Texas. Relevant to this committee is our focus on developing their specific provisions to help small business participate more actively in regional trade, including through information sharing. Our committee our commitment builds upon the joint APEC Trade SME Ministers meeting that Ambassador Kirk held last year in Big Sky. We're also helping small business by opening Russia's market of 145 million customers. Russia's WTO membership will create new export opportunities and bind Moscow to a clear set of rules for trade and transparency. However, for U.S. companies to enjoy these benefits of Russia's WTO membership this summer, Congress will have to act quickly to terminate application of the 1974 Jackson-Vanik Amendment to Russia. We hope this committee will strongly support Chairman Camp's efforts to do just that. In the Western Hemisphere, we are collaborating with other agencies to connect more of our small business to regional partners and entrepreneurs there, as President Obama announced last month on his way to the Summit of the Americas. As we continue to strengthen the international rules trade system and hold our trading partners accountable, we are also enhancing our trade enforcement capabilities. The Interagency Trade Enforcement Center, known as the ITEC, recently established by the President, will increase our capacity to prioritize and to aggressively challenge unfair trade practices brought to our attention by smaller companies. Ambassador Kirk and the entire USTR team continue to reach out to small business across the country to highlight not only export opportunities that we have created, but to hear more about the existing trade challenges. As a result, last year, we were proud to launch the FTA Tariff Tool, a free online way for small firms to do market research and look up specific tariffs. In conclusion, we are very proud of our small businesses that offer high-quality, made-in-America products and services to customers around the world. We are determined to see that they have the trade policy tools they need to compete and to succeed in the global economy. We look forward to working with you to accomplish that goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Ranking Member, and thank you, Ambassador, for being here. We had an ag roundtable down in our district area in Martin County, and one of the major complaints came from a gentleman who has Yee Farms down there about the flooding of tomatoes coming in and how it's affecting our market out of Mexico. So the big question I'm sure that the farmers down in South Florida would like to know, what are the specific things that we're putting in place to help them as far as the tariffs and the non-tariffs and the NAFTA and also the CAFTA, how we can open up China and other Asian markets for our agricultural products so that they aren't penalized.
Thank you for that important question. We had a terrific year in 2011 in terms of our ag exports. We are fully committed to doing everything that we can to help farmers across the country compete in every single global marketplace. With our free trade partners, we do that by lowering tariffs and also reducing the non-tariff barriers behind the border that you can't always see at first. But as you may well know, our ability to fight what we call SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary restrictions that are not justified by science or by risk assessments are a really important part of what we do every single day at USTR.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Yeah. Ambassador, Ambassador Kirk has expressed a commitment to maintaining transparency in the negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And in all the talks that have been conducted this week in Dallas, I just would like to ask you, why did he make the decision to further restrict public involvement in the negotiations by eliminating the full-day stakeholder forums?
The talks that are going on in Dallas right now had very robust set of stakeholder consultations. The negotiators broke for several hours to sit down with all of our stakeholders whom have a very important role in terms of giving us feedback on what they would like to see in the TPP agreement. So we have spent considerable amounts of time working with our stakeholders both before the round in Dallas and also in Dallas.
Why the decision to eliminate the full-day stakeholder forum?
I think what we did was break up the consultations into different periods of time so that we could accommodate the schedules of different stakeholders as well as the negotiators. I know, Ranking Member, that we have had a very robust set of consultations with our stakeholders at this round in Dallas, just as we have at previous rounds and just as we will continue
But at the same
to do so.
Yeah, in other rounds that have been conducted in other places, you have not eliminated the full-day stakeholder forum. So I'm just wondering why. How do you reconcile the fact that he said we're going to maintain transparency and engagement, and then yet you cancel this event? But I would like to ask you, who is representing, or how does small businesses are represented in these stakeholder forums?
We have a number of small businesses that are part of the stakeholder groups. For example, we have our advisory committees that are the more formal way in which we receive input, and we have small business, a minority advisory group that is very robust and provides terrific input. And we also have informal ways of reaching out across the country. I don't think there's a trip that Ambassador Kirk or Ambassador Morantis or I take where we don't reach out to small business, as well as Ambassador Siddiqui, who is our agriculture negotiator and meets with farmers across the country. So outreach and transparency is a critical part of our job that we take very seriously, both in Dallas at this round and in our broader work.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Moving forward, I hope that you will not cancel again the full-day stakeholder forum so that we could have more engagement. But talking about small businesses, we hear that small businesses make up 9 of every 10 businesses that export goods from the U.S. But when it comes to the negotiation process for trade agreements, the interests of the small business community often take a backseat to that of large multinational corporations. My question is, what is your agency doing to integrate safeguards in the TPP to ensure that the interests of big corporations are not disproportionately favored at the expense of small businesses? And if you hear a level of pessimism coming from my line of questioning, is that we have seen this rerun before, where we come here, we discuss trade agreements, and we always raise the issue that even though the 97% of all exporters are small businesses, they are always at a disadvantage.
I understand your concern, and I'd like to reassure you, if I can't do it in my limited time today, then to come back and visit with you, because we are working very hard to make a difference, and I think we are starting to see the results. So just to give you a few examples. For the first time, we have one person designated to handle SME issues within our TPP negotiating team. So they're looking out just for SMEs. And that role is twofold. One, it's cross-cutting to make sure that the SME interests are represented in general chapters on, for example, trade facilitation or business competitiveness. And then also for the chance in this negotiation to have a separate chapter on small and medium enterprises, focused on giving them the tools they need to succeed in the TPP region. And I'm very pleased that that chapter is going exceedingly well right now, and we think we may have agreement with our other TPP partners in terms of the robust approach that the United States is taking towards helping SMEs.
Okay, I have other questions, so on the second line, I will come back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ambassador, I'd like to talk about textiles for a few minutes if we can. One of the members of the TPP, assuming it goes through, will be Vietnam, one of our major textile trading partners. As most folks know, it's not an open economy. It would be different than some of the other members, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, in that fashion. It's a government that it still has a lot of state-owned enterprises, a government that still manipulates its currency. What is the USTR going to be doing as part of the TPP to protect our businesses domestically generally, but also the textile industry specifically, against market manipulation by the Vietnamese government?
We're working very closely with all of our TPP partners to develop a truly 21st century trade agreement. And the obligations obviously run two ways. So we intend to hold each and every one of our partners, including Vietnam, to the highest standards that we succeed in negotiating. And that goes for the range of issues, whether we're talking about goods or non-tariff barriers or state-owned enterprises, which is a very important topic, I think, related to your question, in terms of agreeing on some basic rules of the road. So with respect, for example, to state-owned enterprises, it's not that countries can't have them, but that we have a common understanding of how they operate when it comes to international trade so that they don't disadvantage business. So this is a really key piece of the TPP effort that we are undertaking. But our goals for TPP, as you know, are very ambitious. We've been consulting closely with members of Congress. I believe we've had several hundred consultations at least, and we intend to have many more, because this is an issue, including in particular on textiles, where our stakeholders have clear interests, and we want to do our very best to be responsive to those interests as we all work together to forge what we hope will be a very ambitious 21st century agreement. Specifically,
because Vietnam is a non-market economy, are you all looking at extended phase-out or phase-down provisions for textile tariffs?
It's hard to speak publicly about specific negotiating objectives, but we would be very happy to brief you and your staff in more detail.
Well, let me ask a question that hopefully you can answer publicly, which we've heard back home, that the Vietnamese negotiators have taken a fairly hard line on this and said that they don't want any restrictions on textile exports in the United States, and that if there are any, it'll be a non-starter for them for the rest of the negotiations. Can you comment on that?
Well, I can say that there's often a lot of posturing in public about trade negotiations, not just with respect to TPP, but across the board. What I will say and promise you is that Ambassador Kirk and I and the whole team are committed to vigorously defending U.S. interests, both with respect to the negotiation of trade agreements and then, of course, with respect to their enforcement, so that everybody lives by the rules, as I mentioned earlier, to which they have agreed. That is a critical, critical piece of what we believe is a robust trade agenda.
And as part of our previous robust trade agendas that we have with various countries and various other regions, we have a fairly traditional, a fairly standard yarn forward rule. Are you familiar with what that is? Mm-hmm. Is it currently the USTR's position that they'll be pushing that same rule as part of the TPP, or have you decided to change your position on that?
Well, I'm not going to speak for our chief textile negotiator, who's been down in Dallas working this issue, but I do believe that that is an important component of what our general policy is. So I'd be happy if you'd like to take a question for the record and get back to you with a specific answer if that's useful.
That'd be great. Anything you could do, and I recognize you can't do everything publicly here. I know how negotiating works. Let me ask one question, though, that I do get from folks back home, which is, what's the schedule? It seems so often that textiles, for example, sort of go to the very end of the line, and they're negotiated in the last couple of days and weeks before there's a deadline approaching. What's the schedule for the overall negotiation, and where do textiles fit in that timeline?
Well, the schedule is that President Obama and other TPP leaders have asked the negotiators to wrap up their work by the end of this year. And they did that last November. So we've been on an accelerated schedule ever since.
End of this calendar year? This
calendar year, okay. Correct. 2012. And so, as I mentioned, Dallas is the 12th round. We've also had some informal intersessional rounds so we can get our work done. We're scheduling several additional rounds this year with the goal of trying to wrap this up. As you know, sometimes the most difficult issues are those that end up being worked at the end. But at the same time, each round we are making progress, in our view, on the textile issue as well as all the other issues. It's a 25-chapter, roughly, agreement. And so the textiles are a critical piece, and other stakeholders have interest in other chapters. So we're really trying to push everything as much as we can in favor of our interests.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I'll just close by saying that I recognize it's 25 chapters, Mr. Chairman. It always struck me that free trade agreements could be written on one page, which is you lower your tariffs, we'll lower ours, and we'll just go and compete. It's a shame that we get into these documents that would make the health care bill look simple, for example. But I appreciate you coming today, and yield back the balance of my time.
Ms. Hahn.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Velasquez. Ambassador Shapiro, it's great to have you here. I am the founder and co-chair of the Bipartisan Port Caucus back here in Congress, and I've made it a priority of mine to raise the profile of ports in Congress and the importance for our nation's economy, which obviously includes exports. And everyone knows that our trade policies affect all businesses, whether they directly export a project, import a component or a part, or sell foreign merchandise. And all these goods need to get to and from our ports of entry in a timely and efficient manner. It was recently reported that goods imported through the Port of LA took 48 hours to travel to Chicago and an additional 30 hours to get across Chicago. And it's safe to assume that exports will also be facing transportation bottlenecks. Last week, I sent a letter to the transportation conferees highlighting the critical need for our country to have a national freight policy, to have a national plan on how to best move imports and exports throughout our country. So specifically with this goal to double our exports in a few years, could you discuss if you think it's important for us to have a national policy on moving goods throughout this country, investing in our infrastructure, grade separations, whatever. I'm worried that businesses are poised to benefit from exports, but we may get bogged down in our infrastructure in this country, so that will slow things down.
Well, thank you for that question. We are very supportive of efforts to make sure that the United States has modern infrastructure, whether we're talking about ports or airports or highways or railroads. As you know, President Obama is very dedicated to doing everything that the administration possibly can to create and build an economy that will last for well into the foreseeable future. So I think the point that you're making is a very important one, and an effort that we're very supportive of from the trade perspective.
With just a few minutes left, one of the things that I hear from my small businesses as well is, there are particularly women-owned, minority-owned businesses. They'd love to get involved in the international trade industry. They would love to get somehow involved in exporting their goods. There is a big disconnect between small businesses and this incredible opportunity. What are you doing? What can we do a better job of in terms of educating our small businesses in how they can access capital and how they can get the experience and how they can get the training to actually be involved? I have businesses that can literally see the Port of Los Angeles, but yet have no idea on how they might benefit from this huge growth opportunity in exports.
Well, at USTR, working with SBA and Commerce Department and others, we are very focused on doing everything possible to publicize our export opportunities, to ensure that small business have the finance tools and the other tools they need to access these opportunities. I think one step that they can hopefully take if they're interested in exporting is to contact the local SBDC, the Small Business Development Centers. We have about 2,000 throughout, actually we have about 1,000 throughout this country and nearly 2,000 in the hemisphere. And we're looking to expand more because these SBDCs, and I know the ranking member has at least one in her district, they are great tools to be able to sit down one-on-one and consult with our entrepreneurs and companies that are smaller to find out what is their product. Are they interested in a market where we have a free trade agreement? If so, the public online tariff tool that I mentioned is a great way. We can help them look up their product code. They can right away see what is the tariff treatment with respect to Colombia, which entered into force just this week, as we noted. We hope Panama will be in force within the next few months. Korea entered into force on March 15th, and we have 17 other agreements where we have either zero tariffs or relatively low tariffs. So I think contacting, in the first instance, the SBDC that is local could be a very important step to get them started. We're ready to help as well and ready to work with you on other ideas. But publicizing, I think, what we're already doing as much as possible and the tools we have, while at the same time within the government we're looking at ways to be more efficient and make sure as much as possible we have one-stop shopping, whether it's our Business USA initiative or going to export.gov or using the tariff tool. We're going to try as much as we can to continue to make this easier for people, because we know at first it can seem quite complex. So we'd like to work with you to simplify things.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schilling.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member. And thank you, Ambassador, for being here today. We appreciate your time. My home state of Illinois ranks second in the country for ag exports to nations, and China is a major market, of course, as you're well aware, to U.S. ag products. But international trade commissions stated China's tariff and non-tariff barriers inhibited between 1.3 billion and 2.1 billion in annual sales. What is the USTR doing with regard to the issue with China?
We're very much focused on ensuring that China lives up to the obligations that it has taken on when it joined the WTO 10 years ago. And so with respect especially to the SPS restrictions, we really want to make sure that they're science-based and consistent with valid risk assessment. We've been very active in using international remedies through the WTO when we feel that China is not living up to its obligations. I'm thinking, for example, of broiler parts. We filed an action against China that is proceeding because of the way they were treating our poultry. Because we're so competitive in ag exports, and I mentioned how we've had a banner year, we want to have another one this year, thanks in part to Illinois. We're also very focused on Russia, and we negotiated with Russia for many, many years, finally wrapped those up last fall successfully so that we could provide greater access to the Russian market for pork, for poultry, for beef, for a number of U.S. products where we are highly competitive and we want to see more access.
Very good. Thank you for that. We often hear about the negative implications of free trade agreements. Do you think the United States economy and small business exporters are better off with them in place or worse?
With trade agreements?
Yes, ma'am.
I think they benefit clearly small business because they simply don't have the tools and the resources that larger companies have to try and figure out, what is the trade regime of another country. And unfortunately, the trade agreements can't be one page. They are sometimes many, many, many pages. But the reason we do that is to try to provide clarity on what the rules of the road are. And that benefits our small business. So I'm very supportive of the efforts I mentioned in TPP, trying to involve more small businesses in this effort, and doing it with transparency. As I mentioned earlier, I indicated that it wasn't so much that we canceled an event, rather we reallocated the time, and we had an intensive round of consultations with all of our stakeholders. We simply broke it up, as I understand it, differently than we did in other rounds. But transparency, so small businesses understand what we're negotiating, and when we're done, explaining to them clearly how they can benefit is a critical part of our work and our agenda.
Very good. So that leads me to the next question. That's a good lead-in. Considering only 1% of small businesses in the United States export, what do we need to do to get them to participate a little bit more, I guess?
I think part of it is continuing to speak forcefully, and I commend the chairman and all of the members of this committee for speaking across the country about the importance of trade and why what we're doing is so critical to help small business thrive and help our economy succeed as a whole. So a large part of this is outreach and making clear what the tools are that we are negotiating in TPP, that we have negotiated in APEC, which is a broader group. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum is a broader group than TPP. What we're doing with the European Union, one of our closest trading partners. We like they are very committed to making our SMEs a higher priority. They think we're doing something right. We think they're doing something right. So it's a wonderful opportunity for a sharing of best practices. I mentioned in the Western Hemisphere, this effort to connect our SBDCs with those hopefully to the north in Canada and also down through Mexico and Central America and into South America, particularly in Colombia, our newest trade partner. So as you look around the world, we're very committed to making things as easy as we can so that our small business can thrive. And I would add also for giving them the confidence to try another customer in an existing market or try a new market. So again, I think it's a collaborative effort working with all of you to try to figure out where the gaps still are and what we can do together as partners to try to fill them, because we have the same interest here, which is letting our small business thrive and export more.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. With that, I yield back.
Ms. Chu?
Well, I also sit on the Judiciary Committee, where I've been working hard to address business concerns about intellectual property rights. And this is a major priority for my constituents in the San Gabriel Valley of California. Your testimony mentions that you are pursuing a robust trade policy that supports small business and vigorously enforcing our trade rights. How is USTR making sure that the small businesses are protected from overseas intellectual property rights violations? What recourse does USTR provide for small businesses to ensure that they can report violations and seek redress given their limited resources? And what can you do to strengthen relationships between these small businesses and regulatory agencies such as the Department of Justice so that these small businesses can have more confidence in exporting overseas?
Thank you for that very important question. The importance of intellectual property rights and enforcement is another reason why I believe that small business can benefit greatly from our trade agreements. In our trade agreements, we always seek to have a very robust intellectual property chapter so that we lay out the rules of the road and make clear that if other countries want to partner with us and have more access to our market through reduced tariffs, they in turn have to provide the kinds of protections that we want to see for all U.S. companies, but that particularly benefit the smaller companies that, again, they don't have the resource to engage legions of lawyers to bring litigation in foreign countries. So I think that's another reason why small businesses might want to look first and foremost to trade with our partners under an FTA because of the additional comfort that that provides. For trading partners that are not FTA partners, we of course have the WTO agreements. I'm thinking in particular the TRIPS agreement with respect to intellectual property rights. We have, for example, prosecuted successfully a case against China in the WTO with regard to audiovisual. And in fact, just a few months ago, we reached an important agreement with them on implementing some of their commitments in the film and audiovisual area. So it's an ongoing process where we are very committed to doing what we can to enforce these rights because of the innovation that they foster, because of the entrepreneurship that depends on them. I would add also that the new ITEC, the Trade Enforcement Center, is going to be looking at a range of areas to make sure that we are keeping our trading partners focused on their rights, and if they're not implementing them, that we have the capacity to launch investigations and do what we can to enforce our rights. And again, small businesses, I think, which can be disproportionately affected by barriers, can also, we hope, gain by the new ITEC, because our additional resources mean that when smaller companies come to us with a problem, we'll be able to look into it ourselves. The larger companies, again, have the resources to look into these questions on their own and then come to us. The smaller companies don't. By having a robust enforcement capability as a new tool in our arsenal, we believe we will be able to benefit small business, again, in this manner.
Thank you for that. I went on a delegation to China recently, and I was very startled to find that half of the wine that the Chinese consume comes from France, while only 5% comes from the U.S., and yet we have some of the best wines in the world, particularly from my home state of California. So what programs are available in the national export strategy to help particular industries like the wine industry enter these new markets abroad?
Well, I'm also a fan of California wines. Hope I don't insult anyone from another state, but they are excellent. I wonder if we've had a trade mission to China focused on the wine industry, or what the great potential is for the export of California wines. I think this is an important industry for California and also for other states, the growing industry certainly in Virginia as well. I think it's something that we can certainly look into in conjunction with the Commerce Department and their ability to lead trade missions.
Okay, finally, let me ask, there are many small businesses in my district, but nearly 2/3 of my district does not speak English at home, and they have trouble accessing the services that they need in order to export. What do you do to offer assistance to business owners who are not native English speakers?
I would certainly hope that an SBDC located in an area where there are business owners who speak other languages could have someone on staff to help. I would have to look into whether that is indeed the case, but I'm guessing that probably the Commerce Department has done something to address this concern.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hanna.
I've heard a couple of people mention currency manipulation. Tell me everything you know about it. And with Vietnam, with China, is it? It's alleged. I think personally, I think maybe some of it's blown out of proportion. But what do you know about it?
Well, I know it's in the papers a lot. Certainly, it's a hot topic for discussion in Congress, and I will say this is something that the administration is very focused on. Secretary Geithner has been very involved in this question, and I would probably best refer that question to him and his team, because they've really done the most work on this.
But isn't that an integral part of what makes you successful or not successful? I mean, the value of the dollar right now has a lot to do with our changing export picture. So conversely, isn't it exactly the same when it's coming in the opposite direction?
The value of the dollar can certainly have bearing on the export question. But as I mentioned, Secretary Geithner and his team is focused on the currency fluctuations and discussing that issue with other countries, so I have to defer to him on this question. What I can say is that we are very focused on, no matter what is the international climate in terms of monetary policy, making sure that our companies have the tools that they need to succeed in the marketplace, in terms of the free trade agreements and in terms of the other tools such as enforcement capabilities that we're very committed to pursuing.
But how can you do one without understanding, or at least having a handle on a lever, if you will, on the other?
As a government, we're very involved across the board in these kinds of questions. But USTR's role is to formulate trade policy and make sure that we can negotiate trade benefits for our companies of all sizes, and then, of course, that we have the ability to follow up on the enforcement side. Our jurisdiction does not get it into currency questions, and those we defer to the Secretary of the Treasury, because that is his expertise.
In terms of dairy policy, in Russia for years we've been shut out. Assuming that the Jackson-Vanik goes away and they join the WTO, you have an idea. I come from a place that's a lot of dairy farms. How you can encourage that to our products to go over there in that particular product?
If Congress is able to terminate the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, then our companies, including our dairy farmers, will be able to enjoy the benefits that we negotiated in terms of, for example, the SPS rules. And if Russia doesn't abide by the rules to which they have agreed, we would then have the option of dispute settlement. So strict adherence to the SPS issues that can benefit dairy farmers and enforcement tools, should we need them, would be very important benefits, I think, for the farmers of New York State. But it all depends on whether or not Congress will act quickly this summer to terminate this provision, which dates from 1974, before Russia becomes a member. Otherwise, our exporters will not be able to enjoy the additional benefits that we negotiated.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. I yield back.
Somers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Shapiro, I'm from North Carolina. I represent the 2nd District. Textiles and tobacco are very important in my district. My first question to you is in regard to tobacco. A moment ago, you were mentioning the amount of transparency and trying to increase the amount of transparency. I was recently told, as a member of Congress, that I am allowed to request the language on tobacco within TPP. However, I am not allowed to share any of this language with my staff or any of my constituents that have concerns. My question to you is, why have we not seen this language? And why is the USTR attempting to halt the discussion of the tobacco exemption in Dallas as we speak? And why are they unwilling to share the language on this issue in the agreement?
Tobacco question is obviously an important one that is being worked first interagency and with Congress and with stakeholders. I know I'm not personally involved in that discussion because I'm not handling the TPP negotiations on a day-to-day basis. But I know it's been the subject of a lot of discussion and consultation in terms of finding the right proposal to move forward with. So we just want to reassure you that this is a very important issue, one that the administration and USTR is taking very, very seriously. And we are doing our utmost to work with everyone to find the right path ahead.
But the question being, why is, again, on the issue of transparency, why would the language not be readily available for, of course, myself, but I would need to go over that information with my staff and possibly some of my constituents who are tobacco farmers and have these concerns. Why would that be not forthwith? Why are we holding back on that?
Well, I can't speak to the exact details, but what I can say is we do a significant amount of outreach with Congress, at staff level as well. So I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I do think in general we tried to be very transparent with Congress because it's such a important part of what we do, making sure that we're being responsive to you and your concerns and the concerns of your staff.
Great. Well, then I will make sure that my staff is reaching out to you on those issues. My next question, and I understand that my colleague, Mr. Mulvaney, has already touched on this issue, and of course that is the yarn forward rule. And my understanding is now we are looking at possibly changing that and going forward with a flexible rule of origin. And of course, again, in some of the discussion that I listened to with my colleague, Mr. Schilling, you were talking about the concerns that we have with China, and yet this will actually benefit China. And I'm wondering, why on earth would we consider this rule and once again throw the textile industry under the bus, as was done in the South Korean Free Trade Agreement, forcing textiles to work against another free trade agreement, as well as, for instance, myself. I am a big proponent of free trade, fair trade, but I had to vote no on that agreement because of my textile industry. Don't do that to us again. And I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that that doesn't happen. But if you could maybe just touch on that again, I would truly appreciate it.
I'd be happy to, Congresswoman. I can't stress enough how important the textile industry is to our ability to trade. And we take their interests and their concerns very, very seriously. So I just want to reassure you that we are doing that in TPP as well. This is an important issue, an important constituency, and we want to see them succeed.
So why would there be some favorable thinking here on the flexible rule of origin rather than the traditional way that we've looked at this issue when it comes to the textile industry? I mean, where is the change, and why have we made that?
I've not been involved in the specifics. Our chief textile negotiator has been very involved and is working this issue in Dallas. But I can say as a general matter that we are very committed to making sure that all of our exporters, including the textile industry, remain competitive and that they remain a vibrant part of our own economy.
Thank you. I'm sure that will be reassuring to the textile industry. Thank you, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Ms. Shapiro, Ambassador, despite the fact that for the last 2 decades there has been an emphasis on free trade agreement as a primary tool to increase trade, and the facts that we have before us in respect to small businesses is that only 1% out of 28 million are exporting a product to a country. And then when you come before our committee and there are trade negotiations, you are telling us that trade agreements are going to benefit small businesses. So it seems to me that after 2 decades, and I've been here now for 2 decades, and I've been hearing the same rhetoric, if you will, that those trade agreements are not living up to the promise that were made to small businesses. And they are doing great for big corporations, but not for small businesses. And to tell me that SBDCs, small business development centers, they are not expert on trade promotion. They provide technical assistance for startups, micro businesses, small businesses domestically, but they don't have the expertise. So there has to be a better job, interagency jobs when it comes to trade promotion, and we're not seeing that.
I want to assure you that one of the key priorities of the National Export Initiative launched by the President is focused on SMEs. All of the agencies involved in trade are working together to have the most robust set of tools we possibly can to help our SMEs succeed. I can't speak to what happened earlier, but I can tell you in the last 2 years, I have seen an unprecedented level of coordination, interagency, and coordination with our trading partners. In probably every meeting I have had with a foreign counterpart, I have raised SMEs. How can we work together to help? And just like they're the backbone of our economy, they're the backbone of most economies around the world. So there is great interest in working together more closely to establish these regional links between our SBDCs, which link at the micro level, to partners in different countries around the world so that they have a virtual network and they have real resources too, including access to financing tools and export promotion opportunities to succeed. So this is a challenge, and I'm not suggesting that we have answers. What I'm suggesting is we have a firm commitment and a real dedication and priority placed on this issue that I don't think has been a hallmark of previous administrations. We are determined to work with you to figure out exactly how to make a difference. For example, under a number of our FTAs, we're starting small and medium enterprise committees so that we can, again, together focus on how do we help? How do we connect our SMEs together so that they have export opportunities in both of the trading partners or in additional partners? So it's a challenge, but we've done a lot. I think there's a lot more to do. And that's part of the reason I wanted to come today and see together how we can work more closely together in the future.
Mr. West.
Ambassador, you just mentioned the National Export Initiative. One of the countries that the administration is pushing hard to get into that is Brazil. And this committee was contacted by a small business owner, this healthcare equipment manufacturer. And he faced on average 65% import tariffs as opposed to on this side only 3%. So how can, if we want Brazil to be a part of this national export initiative, how can we level that playing field so the small business can participate in that? I mean, 65% versus 3%, I mean, that's exorbitant. I mean, what can the USTR do to get Brazil to, level that playing field out so that, free trade is fine, but it has to be a fair trade. And again, I have to echo the comments of the ranking member. We talk about small businesses, but they're put at a severe disadvantage.
Brazil is a challenge. We don't have a trade agreement with Brazil. We don't have an investment agreement with Brazil. We did have the first meeting under the new trade partnership agreement that Ambassador Kirk signed last year. We held that meeting in March. So we're very focused on developing a much closer partnership with Brazil. There are many issues we do see eye to eye on, others we're still working towards. SMEs is an issue where they do want to work with us. Investment is also an issue, not in terms of an agreement, but in terms of a dialogue. So we are looking for areas of common ground where we can work together. High tariffs are a concern. So are some of the non-tariff barriers. We've been forthright with them in trying to address these concerns, and we will continue to push with Brazil to do that.
Well, I guess, is there some numerical threshold? You know, part of being, you know, a member of this export initiative, we're going to say that this is non-negotiable with them. I mean, I don't want us to you know, roll over and allow our bellies to be scratched, and you know, our small businesses end up losing out. So, is there a threshold? Is there some point of no return where we're going to push the table, push the envelope?
Well, we are pushing the envelope, Congressman, as far as we can with Brazil, through looking for areas where we can work together. So, for example, they're hosting the World Cup and other events as well, so they have infrastructure needs. In some cases, initially that benefits the larger companies, but then they subcontract with the smaller companies. So it's not an ideal solution, but it's something that we are working towards at this point. And as I said, they do have a focus domestically on SMEs. And so one opportunity might be to link our SMEs through this Connect the Americas initiative, because then they can have more access to each other through virtual networks and other forms of assistance.
Well, that's an important thing for us because, like Ms. Hahn said, you know, we've got Port of Miami, Port Everglades, and Port of Palm Beach down our neck of the woods, and that's very beneficial. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. I yield back.
Mr. Hanna.
Some of the bills, for example, the highway bill, has a Buy America provision in it. Do you have an opinion about those, and do you have an idea of how the net effect, what the net effect might be on American businesses?
Well, we do hear a lot from our trading partners, concerns about Buy America provisions. We try to gain as much access as we possibly can to trading partners' procurement markets, the markets overseas. Mm-hmm. You know, we do have to obviously offer access here as well, or they won't enable us to access their markets. In general, if a country is a trading partner and they're party to the WTO's government procurement agreement, then they have broad access, but there are, of course, some exceptions. So it's a continuing, sometimes source of friction with our international trading partners. On the other hand, domestically, we know that this is important for especially our small and medium enterprises to be able to compete effectively through those procurement processes here.
Do you think it works?
Works in terms of helping SMEs, or in terms of giving us more access overseas?
Both.
I think it does help in terms of our SMEs. I've seen the statistics, and there are certainly gaining more and more of federal procurement contracts. Overseas, it's as long as we have exceptions, it's a tougher push for us to make. So I haven't seen stats on how that balances out yet. It's a very good question.
Well, thank you, ma'am. I yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I want to thank you, Ambassador, for being here today. It's obviously clear that we have a lot of opportunity, I think, to remove some trade barriers and open new markets for our small businesses, and we need to stay aggressive and continue to make small business a priority. But we very much appreciate you coming in today, and look forward to working with your office. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you, everyone.
We'll seat the next panel. All right. we're going to go ahead and start. We have a series of votes coming up at between 2:25 and 2:30, so that'll create a little bit of a problem. We'll probably have to recess for those votes, and then we will come back, but we'll try to get through as much testimony as we can. I'll go ahead and introduce our first witness, which is Mr. Thomas Grafton. He's the president of Thermcraft Incorporated in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Thermcraft is a leading manufacturer of high-quality thermal processing equipment, including industrial furnaces that can reach over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. They currently export to 12 countries. He's testifying on behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers, and welcome to the committee. I might point out, too, each of you have 5 minutes, and the lights will be green up to the last minute. It'll turn yellow and then red at the end of 5 minutes. But, Mr. Grafton, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the House Committee, we appreciate the opportunity to present our experiences regarding international trade as a small business. Again, my name is Tom Grafton with Thermcraft Incorporated, and we're located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, founded in 1971, and we just celebrated our company's 41st birthday and now employ more than 70 people. We manufacture high-temperature equipment supplying to many different types of industries like solar cell industry, aircraft, glass, nuclear components, OEMs, fiber optics, and just to name a few industries. We're also a member of NAM, National Association of Manufacturers, which is one of the largest national trade organizations. But Thermcraft started out, say, 41 years ago in a small 5,000 square foot building in a very poor section of Winston-Salem, and we've now grown to having our own building at about 70,000 square feet, as I say, again, with about 70 employees. But we grew rapidly from making small laboratory equipments, small systems, to much larger systems and for high-volume manufacturing. And customers currently include most of the Fortune 500 companies like the General Electrics, Boeings, DuPonts, Corning Glasses, Rockwell, again, just to name a few. Our customers with international presence actually is what got us started in export. From the standpoint, our specialty is designing custom systems for manufacturing. And the U.S. customer here would purchase equipment, a custom furnace for a particular manufacturing process. They'd be in discussions with sister companies that were overseas. The sister companies would need to duplicate that process, so they came to us. And that's how actually we began our start in exporting was a result of our dealings with U.S. companies. But the bulk of our exports have been primarily the semiconductor industry worldwide, mainly Asia and Western Europe. In the early 1990s, we began dealing with an MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul organization in Europe, and they began distributing our heaters to the semiconductor industry there. And really in the late 1990s, we began to see much of that business move to Asia. So as a result, we began relationships with agents in several Asian countries, including Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, China, and they helped us support that business there. The business in Asia continued to increase, which again gave us more experience, more exposure to exporting, and again in a variety of different countries. Each country kind of presents its own different sets of challenges based upon the product that you're shipping in Asia, Europe, and even within any of those communities. By 2008, our export business had actually reached about 35% of our total sales, which was probably in excess of $4 million a year. And during the same time period, in order to help generate additional export sales, we've developed a standard line of equipment that was more of a catalog distributor type item versus custom equipment. And we've participated in the Commerce Department's New Market Exports Initiative, Gold Key Distribution Program in Singapore, which we're very successful finding a good qualified distributor there. We've also worked with the U.S. commercial service representatives and locating distributors in China, Korea, again Singapore, and many of the other Asian countries. And we're currently working on distributor networks in Europe and the Middle East. But in order to get that Middle East business developed further, there's trade shows we participate in, most recently in the Arab Lab Expo, which is a laboratory equipment trade show that was in Dubai. And as a result of doing that show, we've located a number of possible strong prospects that have potential of enhancing our export items through distributors throughout the Middle East. You know, and that's been the positive side. We've had a lot of help with the U.S. Commercial Service. On the flip side, we've had a lot of export issues arise on a daily basis that continue to be a problem, and mainly it's a matter of finding one source for information to be able to help us get the information we need to be able to adequately export to a particular country. Commercial officers seem to, in our experience, have more or less the big picture, and when we start trying to get into the small picture, they're just not in a position, they don't have that information expertise or to be able to help. You know, regulatory changes are constant, and trying to find one source, again, one source in one place to locate that information it's a challenge. It takes hours and hours and people that we simply, we don't have the manpower to be able to support those types of things. And we've also gone to private export consultants that have helped us and found they've experienced the same problem. You know, we always thought it was our problem as a small business, but we find out it's more of a small business issue versus just our small business. But we can all benefit from improved access to markets abroad, and we're looking to see recent implementation of new trade agreements, which we think can be beneficial to us. Again, we hope the Small Business Administration will redouble efforts to help pursue more FTAs and be able to help find a local single source to be able to help small businesses like us get the information we need. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to testify about my experiences, and happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. Crafton. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Robert Center. Bob is the president and partner of SB&B Foods in Castleton, North Dakota. He's a family farmer of over 30 years, and he's got extensive experience in international trade. SB&B is a two-time winner of the Export of the Year award from the state of North Dakota, and is testifying on behalf of the American Soybean Association. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Bob Sinner. I am a fourth-generation partner in a family farming business and president of SB&B Foods Incorporated. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to provide my views concerning trade policy and its effect on small business exporters. Our company, SB&B, employs approximately 30 people who produce, package, and export an extensive line of identity-preserved soybean products to customers worldwide. With annual export sales of between $20 and $25 million for the past 3 years, our largest exports are in Asia. When our business first expanded to the international marketplace, we received funding for promotional activities in Japan from Food Export USA, a nonprofit funded by USDA's Market Access Program, or MAP. I cannot overstate the success and value of USDA's export promotion programs in expanding farm exports globally. One of the challenges we have encountered over the years as we've expanded to other markets is the lack of consistency in international standards, specifically the patchwork landscape of countries that require a phytosanitary certificate, and the inconsistency of our government to provide them. In this regard, the U.S. government must work towards achieving international harmonization of standards in order to facilitate trade between small businesses and global markets. Under the Korea Free Trade Agreement, food-grade soybean producers now have access to a zero-tariff rate quota for the first time outside of that country's state trading enterprise. But access to the quotas will be a challenge for small exporters because the TRQ is managed by local processor associations and competing member companies. On this point, I strongly urge our government to ensure a certain level of transparency on the implementation and administration of the TRQ so that U.S. exporters can reap the full benefits of the FTA. I would also like to share some thoughts about our infrastructure and transportation system, which challenges a small exporter's ability to compete effectively. We have a transportation system in the United States that prices equipment into and out of large metropolitan locations in favor of bridging many of the rural supplier states en route to departure ports. This approach ignores the importance and necessity of timely food shipments, and we are concerned that as the world continues to demand more grains in soybeans from the U.S., small exporters may not be able to compete unless we have available container equipment at competitive pricing. Finally, it is also my hope that the Food Safety Modernization Act does not impose an additional set of burdensome and costly requirements on small businesses in addition to food quality standards already required by our customers and safety requirements already established by foreign governments. As I have stated, small exporters face enormous competition and a web of international regulatory constraints. Our export promotion programs are among the few tools that help American agricultural exporters stay competitive abroad. And while rapidly growing markets in the Asia-Pacific region are key drivers of the food-grade soybean demand, we must break down remaining barriers to meet increased demand for our products in the region. We hope that a TPP FTA is successful in easing foreign regulatory burdens so that U.S. companies can operate more seamlessly abroad and help small businesses participate more effectively in international trade. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present our views. I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Mr. Chairman, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Joshua Meltzer. He's a fellow at the Brookings Institution specializing in global trade and development. His work focuses on issues related to international trade as well as U.S. trade with key economies such as China, India, Japan, and the European Union. He currently serves as an adjunct professor at the Johns Hopkins University School for Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C., as well as an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University Law School in Washington, D.C. Thank you and welcome.
Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, honourable members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity today to share my views with you on US trade strategy and what's next for small business exporters. In 2011, it became clear that concluding the WTO Doha round in its current form is not possible. Efforts are therefore underway to make progress on elements of the Doha agenda, and the United States is taking the lead in such areas as services liberalisation. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP negotiations, are really the only other trade negotiation to which the United States is currently a party. The 9 countries involved in these negotiations, including the United States, are Australia, Brunei, Chile, Malaysia, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. The TPP also has the potential to be the building block for a wider free trade agreement of the Asia-Pacific region, a goal endorsed by APEC leaders and recently reiterated by United States Trade Representative Ron Kirk at the TPP negotiations in Dallas this week. Given the focus of the current administration on completing the TPP negotiations this year, I will focus the rest of my testimony on the implications of the TPP for the United States and small businesses. In particular, I will focus on the economic implications of the TPP, the role of the TPP in achieving free trade in the Asia-Pacific region, and finally we'll discuss some of the implications for small businesses. The Asia-Pacific region is crucial for the United States. It is the fastest growing region in the world and a key driver of economic growth. Indeed, the region already accounts for 60% of global GDP and 50% of international trade and is expected to grow by around 8% this year. In 2011, United States exports to TPP economies were worth approximately $105 billion and imports were valued at $91 billion, giving the United States a trade surplus in the range of $14 billion. However, the economic benefits to the United States of the TPP will be greatly expanded as more countries join. And in this regard, already Canada, Mexico and Japan have expressed interest in joining. And should these countries join, then the agreement will end up covering over $800 billion worth of exports and $875 billion worth of imports of goods and services. The potential economic gains to the United States from the TPP highlights its significance as a template for free trade in the Asia-Pacific region. The recent Korea-United States Free Trade Agreement, which came into effect on March 15th this year, will likely serve as a baseline in the negotiations. USTR is also seeking agreement on a range of new rules, such as on regulatory coherence, to reduce trade barriers arising from unnecessary regulatory diversity amongst TPP countries and rules on state-owned enterprises that will discipline the trade-distorting impact that they have when they are not operating according to competitive market-based principles. The TPP should also address the realities for businesses which rely on supply chains located in different countries, often in the Asia-Pacific region. Developing coherent rules of origin is one way of ensuring that the TPP reflects these business realities. Progress on trade facilitation, which reduces the cost of moving goods through customs, is another one. The TPP can also provide an important framework to develop new rules that protect the free flow of data across borders. The internet is now a key driver of trade, and actually especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, as these companies are now able to use the internet to access customers overseas and at scale. The TPP will also address the trend in the Asia-Pacific region towards regional economic integration that excludes the United States. For instance, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has free trade agreements with China, Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand. These agreements divert trade from the United States, and in the absence of US participation in developing these trade rules undermines the United States leadership in the region. In this light, the TPP will also be an important vehicle for pursuing economic integration that is both Asia-Pacific in scope and involves the United States. Small and medium-sized businesses will stand to gain significantly from trade liberalisation under the TPP. In fact, almost 98% of all exporters and 97% of importers are small and medium-sized enterprises, though representing only 40% of goods and 31.5% of imports, so there's clearly room for growth. In addition to this, 94% of small and medium-sized enterprises both import and export. Therefore, trade agreements such as the TPP, which both liberalise barriers in the United States and abroad, should benefit small businesses. Small businesses will also benefit the most from government efforts to reduce trade barriers, as their capacity to overcome these barriers, for instance, by establishing subsidiaries overseas, is certainly limited. The TPP has a potential to be a 21st century trade agreement, and if it fulfills these ambitions, small businesses should stand to gain. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify here today.
Thank you very much. Our final witness is Dr. Mark Ludden. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Gittimer Company in Westerville, Ohio. They manufacture the speaker and sound systems that are used in major theaters around the world, including IMAX. He's testifying on behalf of the Consumer Electronics Association. Welcome. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you very much. Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Velasquez, members of the committee, thank you very much for having me here today and for your efforts on this important matter. I also very much appreciated the depths of the questions the committee asked to the ambassador previously. As Chairman Graves said, my name is Mark Ludden. I'm the president and CEO of the Gittimer Company. We're based in Westerville, Ohio, suburb of Columbus, and we make the butt kicker brand of consumer electronics products. And what they do is let you feel bass like a silent subwoofer so that you're able to have the full experience without the volume. And our products are used by the world's best musicians, in home theaters, by video gamers, and in movie theaters around the world, and in Kansas City. I'm also a member of the Board of Industry Leaders and of the Consumer Electronics Association, and past chairman of CEA's Small Business Committee. The CEA represents over 2,100 diverse technology companies, and my company, the Gittimer Company, is proud to be among them, and we're also very proud to be a small exporter. I'd like to briefly talk about two things. First, that well-crafted free trade and free trade agreements can and do help small businesses. And secondly, to recommend 3 actions Congress can take to continue to help our small businesses grow and thereby allow us to hire more Americans. So why is free trade important to our small business? Historically, 35% of our sales are outside the U.S. In fact, in Q1 of this year, 45% of our sales are outside the U.S., 10% in Canada, and 35% outside of North America. In the past 6 months alone, we've shipped butt kicker brand products around the world. Spain, Belgium, France, South Korea, Brazil, the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, Singapore, Japan, Denmark, Switzerland, Portugal, Kuwait, and more, including product to a Chinese movie theater chain. So we're proud to let you know that we are shaking Chinese movie theaters, you-know-whats, with Kentucky-made butt kickers. So as you can see, exports are a vital part of our business. For example, the Korea Free Trade Agreement dropped an 8% tariff on our products that we sell to a Chinese movie theater chain, made us much more competitive. The new Colombia Free Trade Agreement should reduce the price of our products exported there by 11%. And we were just recently contacted by their leading cinema company asking about our products. So that will make us, I think, more competitive and have us a better chance to win that business. These lower costs help us sell more products and our international customers to buy more of our products. Trade barriers act as a tax on transactions and create a zero-sum game where no one wins. Trade barriers and trade policies can unfairly and disproportionately affect small businesses who are not able to absorb these extra costs, and it can make it harder for us to compete against large multinational companies. But well-crafted free trade agreements do not cause small businesses to lose jobs. Instead, they can be the reason small businesses create jobs. So what can Congress do to help? I'd like to make 3 recommendations. First of all, I ask you to support the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. This agreement is of key importance to CEA members and the tech industry as a whole. Successfully negotiated, it will include tariff elimination and removes technical barriers to trade. Secondly, support the expansion of the Information Technology Agreement. GTAMR and CEA strongly support the efforts to expand the product coverage within this agreement. Since its passage, which I think was about 15 years ago, ITA has helped drive innovation, create jobs, open new markets, and lower consumer prices across the globe. Yet, since its passage, the product scope of this agreement has never been expanded, leaving products that we all use now, such as tablets and smartphones, outside of the scope of the current agreement. And finally, pass the Transparent Rules Allow Direct Exporting and Jobs Act, as sponsored by Representative Tipton. This act, the Trade Act, creates an easy-to-use tool for companies to access country-specific information regarding export regulations and trade requirements. And there's something to be said for simple-to-use tools. And you're right, I do agree, the SBDCs, they're not experts in it, so the Trade Act really will help. This tool will make it more cost-effective for a small business to easily access information about foreign regulations, labor requirements, custom declaration information, and more. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to testify. I welcome any questions you may have.
We are into this vote series. There's 3 votes. And so it may take us, hopefully we'll be back within 30 minutes. And then we'll ask questions, if that's all right with you all. So we will recess for a short period of time, and we'll be right back.
How much did he pay you for that commercial advertising?
We'll bring this the hearing back to order and start with our questions. I'll turn to Ranking Member Velasquez for questions.
Mr. Mercer, critics of the USTR have complained that negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership have been conducted behind closed doors. And in fact, one of the Congress lady was questioning about the tobacco issue. And nobody will know what the proposal will look until it has been signed off by all the parties involved. Does this secretive approach to the negotiating process pose risks that the agreement may not be able to garner public support once it sees the light of the day?
Thank you for your question. And I'm a very big supporter, personally, of transparency throughout government, certainly as far as possible in the trade negotiating process. My sense is that, generally speaking, USTR has done a very good job of trying to be transparent in its trade negotiating processes with the TPP as well as with its other free trade agreements. I do understand that often these issues involve somewhat of a trade-off between providing as much information as possible to stakeholders and keeping them informed of the developments in the negotiations, while at the same time providing a certain level of confidentiality for negotiators from the United States and other countries to also express their views freely and frankly. And I think that that's always an ongoing balance, and whether it's struck appropriately in any particular negotiation, I think has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. As far as the TPP goes, I haven't been directly involved in any way with the negotiating process, so I'm not personally familiar with how that has played out. But some of the feedback that I certainly got from speaking to some stakeholders in this town and elsewhere has been that the USTR, and in fact most governments participating in that process, have been making good faith efforts to discuss the negotiations as they progress.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Sinner, you spoke about the lack of coordination in terms of trade promotion assistance. Do you see what, in your opinion, would be the quickest and most cost-effective means of improving coordination between the different agencies and harmonizing their support when it comes to putting together strategies that will help small businesses and medium-sized businesses reap the benefits of trade agreements?
Well, in agriculture, you have regional divisions of Food Export USA, which is a division of MAP. And those are funds that are available for export promotion, export promotional materials. And those are actually, quite helpful to help a small business get started. Many of the trade offices in the states, in cooperation with the Department of Agriculture, which have a conduit link to Food Export USA or the regional offices of MAP, are also very helpful to small exporters to looking at the regulatory regulations and some of the things, the first steps to get started. So, I mean, there is a process, and I think at the ground level, those have been helpful.
Okay. Mr. Crafton, thank you, sir. While the recently passed trade agreements and Trans-Pacific Partnership improve access to foreign markets, they will not translate into to improve market share for small businesses if problems accessing credit go unresolved. How might the ongoing lack of trade financing impact your industry's capacity to export abroad?
We've been fortunate that it's not made a major impact, simply because we have forged partnerships with distributors that we utilize them to handle the financial transactions. At the same time, we also are dealing with some larger potential projects at this point, and having the association with Ex-Im Bank has been a tremendous boon to allowing us to actually get orders that we otherwise probably would not be able to handle.
So when you say we, are you referring to your company?
Yes, the company,
and
yes.
Do you have any kind of anecdotal stories coming out of the manufacturing sector?
Not specifically. I mean, again, it's just been a lot of cases. We deal with markets that are maybe Middle East, and some ones that may be marginal type things that we have to deal with financing that, Ex-Im allows us to do that, where otherwise we just don't have the resources to do otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
you. Thanks to the panel, and thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member. You all were here with the ambassador was here. If you could have traded places with the ambassador or the actual USTR ambassador, and there were two things that you would implement which would help our small businesses in the arena of free trade, fair trade, what would be the two policy initiatives that you would enact?
Congressman West, I'll respond to that first. And it was addressed by Ranking Member Velasquez a couple times earlier today. Those of us that are involved in international trade would like to be involved and would like to be somehow in the discussion of some of the negotiation. Not so much the negotiation. At the table, so that we understand what is on the table. I hear all the time from customers in Asia their fear of what this is going to be. They're asking me questions about what is involved in this TPP. To be honest with you, I don't know the nuts and bolts of the TPP, but I would like to be more involved in that. So that's one thing.
And that concerns me because, Mr. Luden, you asked us to make sure we support the TPP, but Mr. Senator just said he doesn't exactly know what's in it, and that's one of the problems we have up here on Capitol Hill. Sometimes we pass things that we don't know what's in it. But next.
Congressman, if I might, I will, the two things that I would think would help small businesses the most in the United States are on the trade liberalising front, generally speaking, reducing tariffs and non-tariff barriers, both overseas, but also importantly here in the United States, I think would be significantly beneficial. It always needs to be remembered that when we talk about improving the opportunities for small businesses and businesses generally to be competitive internationally, then often imports are an important part of that equation. And in fact, the statistics do demonstrate that approximately 55% of imports into the United States are actually used as inputs into production processes, into making other goods which are then sold. So actually reducing those type of barriers can also be particularly helpful. The other thing, which is probably not particularly necessarily in the purview of the USTR, but I think would go a long way towards improving the competitiveness generally of small businesses, are some of the more longer term but really crucial policies which revolve around things like education, innovation, infrastructure, and creating really the environment here in the United States which allows these businesses to be highly productive and competitive.
And if I may answer, Representative West, I would agree with Mr. Sinner that the inputs from the SMEs to the USTR to these processes, and although I'm sure they're getting them, maybe a wider ask to the SMEs so that they knew it was available to speak on those topics, a way of soliciting comments, soliciting input, maybe in a more aggressive manner, I think would be very helpful. The other point I would go back to is Brazil, that one of the representatives brought up. It's a booming market. It's a burgeoning market for our type of product. The disparity, I think you brought that up. The disparity,
65% to 3%.
Yeah, the disparity is something that, although the USTR is working on it, that's something that, if that's equalized out, could certainly open new markets for us. And to your point about the TPP, yeah, I do urge you to support it, but only as all the members have said, if it's well-crafted and if it makes sense. So in the overview standpoint of being able to reduce tariffs and to break down trade barriers, that makes sense and totally in favor of that. But done poorly, no, a bad bill is not a good bill.
Absolutely.
From our standpoint, the free trade agreements don't directly impact us quite as greatly, only from the standpoint of we have such a diversity of industries that we cater to. We're not focused through electronics, through textile, through one other one necessarily. But bottom line is it is important that the organizations that are supposed to be helped have some input into what's being crafted into the bill.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, last question. Will there ever come a time when we don't need the Export-Import Bank?
I think not. When you're dealing with smaller companies, where our sales are 10 to 15 million range, and we simply don't have the resources in any other way, or it's also a safety net. If a customer defaults on a bill or defaults on payments, the Ex-Im Bank is able to, it acts as an insurance policy in addition to it, so it allows us to go after things which otherwise might be too risky.
My comment is we don't use Ex-Im Bank. We use an international credit insurance company. It works fine. We did use some Ex-Im Bank a few years ago, but the level of protection was a little bit lower than going with international credit insurance company.
Okay.
We don't take advantage of the Ex-Im Bank either at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member, I yield back.
You all have been successful in, or experienced some success at least with exporting and creating jobs. Do you have any recommendations you would give to businesses who are struggling with starting that process or not wanting to start that process just because they're afraid of it or whatever the case may be. Any advice? What would that advice be?
Well, our main benefit is that there are a lot of U.S. government and state resources that are available to help companies like us export. North Carolina, for example, has 6 offices scattered throughout the world, and those offices have a dedicated employee that is their sole job is to help companies like me be able to develop export markets within that country or that region. So again, just through a little research, finding those resources, government resources that are available, because most of the time they're of no expense to the company.
Mr. Senator.
That's a good question, and I'm quite involved on our state level, involved in the North Dakota Trade Office, and we are very proactive with companies, encouraging them and put together resources on the state level through export assistance with companies that have experience, and helping smaller companies get started. We've done okay with that, and a lot of companies at first, you're right, they're scared. I don't really need this, and once they get started and involved, they do very well. People are people, and doing business with someone is no different than how you want to be treated. If you can develop an honest relationship, the Americans are notorious for wanting to make a quick buck. But when you get outside the boundaries of this country, it's all about relationships and building integrity with a relationship. Of course, quality is always important, but it can be done.
I'll just say briefly, Chairman, that the preamble to the World Trade Organization, in fact, says something along the lines of ensuring the predictability and stability of the world trading system. And I think that from a business perspective, even though these are long and certainly at times complex rules, their key underlying goal here is really to create a certain degree of certainty and reduce the risk for businesses when they do want to engage in trade overseas. So despite what can appear at times daunting length of some of these trade agreements, taking time to understand the extent at which they provide them with actually more certainty and predictability than without them might actually be also some help.
I'd like to answer that maybe a little differently, and I think what we need to do is to help convince people that you can do it, right? That you just need to take the jump. And with no disrespect, the saying is, one of the worst things to hear is, we're the government, we're here to help. And I guess in this case that's really the government from state, local, and federal level on the export. You guys have done a masterful job on this, and I don't know that message is quite getting out of how much, on a bipartisan effort, that you're really trying to make it something that's accessible. And so I think what happens to an SME, especially a very small one, is the amount of regulations and the ensuing possible risk can be very daunting. And then the question is, where do you find the help? How do you get the help? And will anybody help me? And again, as a small business person, it's all about the level of risk you're comfortable with, right? You don't want to take more risk not to get the reward. In this instance, just look at what you're doing here with this hearing, bringing the USTR ambassador in. You were kind enough, ranking member, to meet with us when I was with the SBC Small Business. I mean, it's been something that you folks have really lived and have put your hearts into. And there are some real resources out there that make it possible. We weren't born with this knowledge. Our lady who does our export and does the harmonizing codes and learns that, we've gotten help. And candidly, we've gotten help from the government. So I think one of the things, I'd answer this just to summarize in 2 ways, Chairman. One is, the message I think would be, jump in, the water's fine. And secondly, that your government, state, local, and federal, is really trying to pave the way and has this as a focus to make it a level playing field, because when given that chance, American small businesses really do compete, and they compete well. So I thank you for the question, and I thank you for your efforts on this.
Are you sure you were not my witness?
I was born in Queens, as you remember.
Well, with that, the committee is going to obviously continue to closely follow the impact of trade policy on small businesses. And I appreciate all of you coming in today. Some of you came a long ways, and that's very much appreciated. And your testimony was very, very helpful. And with that, I'd ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And with that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you all.